Hello and welcome to this episode of Nucleus Wealth Empower, where I go looking for what the good life is and how finance can support and empower us in achieving that. I'd like to start in the spirit of reconciliation by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So today is the first in a series I'm doing on financials across the generations. And to help me look at the 20s, I've got Aileen Chong, Jayden Stent, and Tim Fuller joining me to take us through this. So Aileen is Nucleus Wealth's client liaison specialist, and she's been so for over 1.5 years now, working tirelessly to ensure clients and prospective clients get the answers and help they need. Aileen has a Bachelor of Environments, majoring in Geography from the University of Melbourne, and has been soaking up finance ever since she started working here. Welcome back to the show, Aileen.
Thanks, Shelley.
Jayden has a Bachelor of Business, majoring in Marketing, and has been on the Nucleus Wealth team for around 2 years. As you might have guessed, he handles the marketing here at Nucleus Wealth and has recently taken over the production of podcasts and video content. Jayden, welcome to the show for the first time.
Thanks for having me, Shelley.
And last but not least, Tim Fuller, Head of Advice at Nucleus Wealth and host of Nucleus Investment Insights. Hopefully you know him well from those podcasts. If not, I recommend you check it out. That's live 12:30 Australian Eastern Time every Thursday. Tim, thanks for being here.
Hi, Shelley. Hi, everybody. Great to be on.
So a quick reminder before we get started, if you haven't already, subscribe and click the notification bell to be notified when we go live or have a new webinar to watch, or follow us on your preferred podcast platform. And we also ask if you could take a moment to click like on the video now to help our show grow. Okay, so on today's show, we have a bit of an agenda today, but what I'm really hoping is that we can just get a really good discussion going between Jayden and Aileen and Tim about what some of the issues that they're facing and thinking about in this period of life for them, and also some of the issues that generally people going through this period might be looking at. So whilst looking at that, hopefully we're going to go through the life transitions and some of the things you need to be aware of as you're going through those changes in your life, and some of Tim's tips around these things. So I might actually kick it over to Jayden and Aileen to start off, if you're happy to.
Yeah, sure thing, Shelley. Thanks for that. So, Tim, I suppose my first question, which it can form a bit of an overview of the episode, is what are the sort of financial goals that we should be trying to prioritize in our 20s? And within those, what are some things that we can do to set us up for success? So I imagine that, for example, saving for a house is something that a lot of people in their 20s are starting to think about or starting to move towards. So that could definitely be a major one. So yeah, that'd be, I'd appreciate some insight on that.
Cool. Yeah, no problems at all. Thanks for the question, Jayden, and thanks for the intro, Shelley. Yeah, so I guess because we're focusing today on the Generation X, Generation Y, Generation Z, I guess, is it where we're sitting here, the 20s and 30s. So obviously that's it's a period of enormous change for a lot of people in so many respects. You're leaving maybe high school and getting into university, or you're finishing up university. You're getting your first job, probably getting a series of jobs perhaps these days, and you're potentially leaving home as well. You've got relationship formation and breakups perhaps, and then more formations that are going around in there as well. So there's a lot of things that are happening both in your personal life as well as your financial life. And it's kind of a place where it's pretty easy to not look at the bigger picture because you've got so much in front of you immediately. And so where I guess the financial advice sort of piece keys into that a little bit is actually bringing in some of that longer term view and looking at some of the things that you can do now, which can then pay off enormously in the future, and help to perhaps lift a bit of the shroud of the emotional and the turmoil of the 20s, which I think most people go through. It's not a bad thing. It's just part of life. and how then looking forward and putting some things in place now that you can be thankful for in the future. Look, as I mentioned, a huge number of steps and changes, and I guess everybody sort of runs their own race in a way, and a lot of that's to do with your upbringing, your own background, your own financial background, and what's happened prior in your life and where you want to go going forward as well. So, we've got to keep it pretty broad today, but at the same time, I've got some top tips. We've got a fair bit to go through, which I'm really excited to bring to you, and I hope it adds some value to the audience.
Sounds good.
All
Thanks,
good.
Tim. Do you want to start going through some of those top tips?
Yeah, sure. We can jump into some top tips. I think we can, it might be easier. I think if we kick off with the top tips, just to sort of maybe set a bit of a framework for people that are going, okay, well, if I want to walk away from this podcast with a bit of value and some key things that I can take away, here's probably what I'd look at first. So my first top tip is really around your most important asset. And so if you sort of stop and think, what's my most important asset at the age of 20, you'll probably say something like my car, or my collection of shoes, perhaps, or there might be, obviously when people think of assets, they think of the material value and something that's worth them. Your biggest asset by far and away, and this sort of goes across the board, but it's really relevant is your time and the way that you spend it. And the way that you obviously convert time to money is through work, is through both short-term work or initial work, and then also your longer-term sort of career aspirations. For mine, a big component of that is and even for myself, who's been through a career change, halfway through, I guess, at the end of my 20s or early 30s, you can be forgiven for not knowing exactly what you want to do, but you can certainly help your overall financial picture by having a little bit of a think about I guess the long-term viability is probably an easy way to put it of different careers that are out there as well. I've got a number of charts in there. We won't go through them too much, but almost certainly in this day and age, you're going to need to look at further education. Like, it's a must. We've sort of grown up with it, even in my generation and in the newer generations. I think it's been beaten into us, which is quite a stark comparison to perhaps people growing up in the 70s and 80s, where going to university, you're in a very small percentage of the workforce. Now it's almost, unfortunately, for most career paths and progressions, education's just part of life now, that you're going on to further education and you need to sort of skill up, and that's because it's getting a lot more competitive. So it's all you're investing time and you're investing money into the your chosen post education, right? And so you've got to really, and this is maybe speaking more to the 18 to 22-year-old section of the market, if they're listening, is saying, okay, well, do I focus on what I love? And there's often that saying, if you like what you do, or if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Good on you if you can get that. But for everybody else, it's probably worth going, okay, well, am I getting into a particular area of the market where I'm not going to be replaced by robots? Probably a quick one that jumps out. Offshoring is another big issue as well. So, jobs and skills that can be easily now, and as we've known through COVID and, the remote working, which has been a great benefit, but also comes with the risks of being replaced by cheaper work. Is that going to be, something that I need to consider in my pathways as well? And then it's about, also, I guess, probably not specializing too much in your preferred area that you want to go into with education. So it does give you more options at the other end of it. It doesn't really sound very financial, but what it does is in the long term, it's shown, and there's plenty of studies out there that going into the workforce or at some point increasing your education levels will lead you to higher pay levels at the other end and across the journey. So that's probably a big one. I might be preaching to the converted, but it's a funny one, maybe because I'm speaking to probably more parents of kids that are 18 and 20, and they're saying, what should my kid get into? I know they can do X, Y, and Z, but what's going to pay off in the long run? And look, for Australia, there's a number of ones. I've got some charts there: construction, mining, things that where you're interfacing with humans and it won't be replaced. So I think it's a pretty safe bet. And obviously, we've got an aging workforce that needs caring, or an aging population that needs caring for at the other end. And also we love buying and selling houses to each other, so construction pays off as well, along with infrastructure. Just
Did you have a
finally,
question, Aileen? Oh, sorry.
yeah, sorry, cut in any time.
No, that's okay. Tim, you mentioned things like a car, paying for the house, getting an education. A lot of these require people, especially students or young people our age, to take out a loan. So how important is it for us to start budgeting at this age? And how important is it for us to start saving? At what age do we start? And how far in the future do we need to do that?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, look, that'll jump us across to my other top tips. I was just going to finish off actually, and we've got a bit to say about that one. Was just finally just put some real value in what I call sort of building your networks, and staying close to the money. So that where I was going with that was really the the more people you know in the industries that you're working in, and getting out there and interfacing. Not obviously, it's great to make friends in the workplace and whatnot, but it's also great to build an external relationship, whether it be using LinkedIn or things like that. You'll quite often find people will be very helpful, particularly when you're starting out. You grab a coffee, you buy them lunch. It's somebody that you can refer to later on if you've got a decision process that you wanted to have a chat to. Family and friends are a fantastic start for that if they're in a similar profession to, or career path of what you're looking for. But it's about having a multitude of different people that you can talk to and get, more information, which is, never a bad thing. And from the staying close to the money, this is just one that sort of resonated with me, particularly when you're getting paid. The closer that you can get to the pointy end of a business, so where money actually comes in, the higher your trajectory can go if you really work at it, and obviously it works for you. And obviously this is not transferable across every profession and service out there. Obviously it's pretty hard to do that in, say, a government department, but certainly in the private side, if you are closely attuned to the benefits or the financial success of the business, you'll quite often find that translates to financial success for your pay packet.
Can you give some examples, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Of this spectrum as well, like what it might be.
Yeah, sure. So look, a big part of, I guess for us, the economy is almost certainly moving in a services realm. So, you can look at any chart of growth in sectors, and obviously manufacturing's just been troubled for years for many reasons. The big part of, and if you see the opposite line, which is sort of going to the moon, is services. So people talking to people servicing people, and those sort of things. Even in a services business, though, you've got sort of like a front of house and a back of house, if you will. So the front of house are the ones that are communicating with the clients. They're, working through problems, building products, and essentially, being the face of an operation, or a service, or a company. And then you've got the back office component, which, while still absolutely, responsible for the benefits of the business, sometimes miss out a little bit on the accolades when things go really well, and when pay grades and and bonuses and things like that are being handed out. So you don't have to. It's not like you need to walk into a high sales sort of role or whatever it is, business relationships, or you're not going in there as a deal maker and deal swinger in your early 20s. But if you're wanting to succeed in whatever field it is, putting yourself on a trajectory to get closer to where cash comes in and out of the business, or particularly comes into the business, is quite helpful. And look at I'm sure people that are listening to this podcast have listened to many other ones, and it's a pretty common theme, I think, pretty common tip to to sort of guarantee success across the journey.
So before we jump into Eileen's one, can I just ask about further education?
Sure.
Because I think when I first looked at that point, I thought higher education and university, but I guess within the word can't come to me right now, but the more hands-on or the trades, are you including that as well in terms of further education, apprenticeships and that sort of thing?
Yep.
In terms of what you've just said about how important further education is, can you just expand on what it might mean for that sort of sector?
Oh, look, absolutely. Yeah, look, it's very easy, I suppose, for us sitting in our cozy, home offices at the moment, to think about the professional side of the economy and the professional sectors. in my experience, and I guess I've come from a construction background, as much as the professional services now. Education is still quite relevant. Experience is probably the key one, and getting out there and getting experience in even in the trade side and the blue collar side will pay spades, particularly if you're looking for jobs, looking for further work. But the interesting part is that there is actually now a growing need for education in blue collar across a number of different sectors. And look, friends of mine, and I've got a bunch of friends that have worked across or in the construction industry. And in particular, more regulated sectors in the blue collar game. So I'm talking about like electrical and plumbing. You need to carry certificates, and you need to be registered, and there's licensing and all the rest of it. And so what that's doing is it's narrowing the pool of people that are available to do that job, which means you typically get paid more. It also means that you're not at risk of low skilled labour being able to take over or to limit your chances of getting work. It is sort of somewhat.
So there are barriers to entry as an economist.
Correct, that's right. It's like any job or opportunity. You want to look at areas where you've crossed over a high barrier to entry that's effectively limiting other people and therefore increasing your value. And look, yeah, certainly in the blue collar side, getting the trade tickets and getting all these qualifications and bits and pieces, you're not immune or excused from doing that. Unfortunately, everyone's got to go to do some level of schooling. There's certainly a lot more of the practical element, I think. Like there's a lot less in the early days anyway to get into it. And look, even looking at going back to that sort of which pathway do I take? In coming as as a Melburnian, Victoria's always had a very strong union presence, and so therefore pay rates are generally a lot higher on union side. So if you're sort of going, okay, well, I'm going to work in the outer burbs or inner city high rise, you'll find that there's probably a very big difference leaning towards the high rise side because it's so heavily unionised, and they've been able to achieve a really good per hour rate or whatever it is.
That's really interesting because my brothers work on the trade side of things, and they got a pretty good lifestyle as well. Like every 2 weeks they get their RDO off, and it's good holidays and that sort of thing. So there's a lot to be said about the industry and the unionized sites where you can work.
Well, that's right, yeah. And look, the blue collar side is probably the most at risk of, say, large amounts of immigration where really all they're doing is providing manual labour. And that's why it's crucial, even if you're looking at going down that path, incredibly lucrative. And as you say, lifestyle is fantastic for those. You're working outside if you want to work outside. But just being smart about, ensuring your position by, getting high levels of training or working into areas that are more specialised, that will, make sure that you can keep a high rate of pay and you've got, pricing power in the market for your labour.
Excellent. Thank you.
No worries. So we'll jump across to Eileen's question as well. So sorry, it was a bit convoluted there, but cash flow. So cash flow and budgeting. So look, for me, when you're in your 20s, and it just sounds perverse and you don't want to do it. And to be honest with you, I wasn't very good at it when I was in that stage as well. You always get to reflect back later. But yeah, look, it's like anything. If you had your time again, you probably would have watched the pennies and done something with them. And look, knowing what you know now, I suppose hindsight's always 20/20 on where you'd invested and things like that. But having some control over your cash flow gives you some control, a lot more control for mine over your life, and gives you more options going forward. It's fun to spend money. I love spending money. My wife loves spending money. But at the end of the day, you've got to make sure you're spending it on the right things, because otherwise, you start falling behind or, not achieving your own goals. But the positive on that is that time is on your side for things like, compounding investments. And when we look at those, obviously a go-to with us is shares and portfolios. And there's obviously property, and I'll speak a little bit about that in a second. I'm sure we've got a question on it. Do you
want to just compounding? What's that?
Sure. So compounding is essentially your money making money. It's the growth that you get. So, if you invest $100 and you get 10% on your money, that's 110 at the end of the year. And so then at the end of at the start of the next year, you're not investing 100, are you? You're investing 110. And so what it does over time is it really
And that $10 earns money, which earns money,
Correct.
which earns money. It's
So
just
your
like this
earnings
beautiful
are earnings.
cycle.
It is.
When you think about buying that new pair of jeans, what it might cost you in 40 years' time. I wish I could
Exactly
think
right.
about that
And
now.
that's the scary thing with buying, non-appreciating assets or things over the period. And so yeah, look, and that's right. Money making money. I think Albert Einstein said it was the 8th wonder of the world. And it can be pretty easily sidelined because it's quite boring, I guess, in a way. Perhaps in the 20s when everything's sort of, there's a lot more fun things you can spend your money on. But at the same time, there's no harm in getting started earlier, because the quicker that you get your head around it, the more it'll mean to you later on. And before you know it, you've got a terrific asset there. A really easy go-to, and I think we've mentioned this in the past, is just making some additional contributions to superannuation. It's invested already. You don't need to worry about the day-to-day management of it. You just need to worry about getting a bit of extra money in. And look, without a shadow of a doubt, when anyone I've seen in their 30s with a much bigger balance than I would have expected, it's because they've done exactly that in the early days. Maybe not forever, but they've got started on it, and then they've just let compounding grow, and it will through their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and they'll be, thankful that they did it at the other end. And that sort of goes into that sort of super piece of, getting your super straight. So, multiple accounts because you've had multiple jobs, very easy to do, and we've all done it. Multiple fees and multiple insurance policies is probably where the damage is done on having, a bunch of different, say, industry accounts, because you've worked across a number of different industries, and they've each often just automatically given you one if you haven't supplied it, or maybe it's mandated. And it's the insurance, unfortunately, where you're sort of buying it in the early days, where you probably don't have a huge need for it, but it comes along automatically with most of the, with the starter sort of super funds. And look, fees are actually reasonably cheap in super, but the insurance piece can, when it's doubled and tripled over, can be the thing that just leaves you with not much at the end if you leave them running. So,
but also if you come back to compounding, multiple fees do matter.
Oh, exactly right. Yeah. Well, you're removing the compounding ability because the deductions are coming out, and you might be putting some money in. You're probably not earning a huge amount because you might be studying, or or got some part-time jobs, but it's you're wanting to try and protect the balance that you've got from fees and erosion from forces that you can do something about.
Tim, I had another question on that
Sure.
point. So let's say I'm saving and putting money into my superannuation, and let's say, for example, in this time, COVID or some sort of emergency hits, would it be better to put my money in an individual investment account so that is accessible straight away? With superannuation, you can't really retrieve all of that money. What is your advice on that?
Yeah, sure. Look, you've nailed it. And the big piece, or there's with a lot of things, particularly government mandated, there's carrot and stick. The carrot, of course, is some tax savings on getting money into superannuation, but the stick is you can't get it out again, as you've said, and you lose effectively liquidity on that additional savings because you've locked it away.
Maybe a safety net might be a more
exactly right. Yeah,
that's
exactly where I was going. Yeah, so look, the answer there is to build yourself up and be proud of and have some ownership over some level of emergency funds. Now it might be a couple of months worth of rent and outgoings. Everyone's got their own sort of figure in a way. For mine, probably between 5,000 and 10,000. The unfortunate thing now, and I think there's another question coming on this, is that 10,000 sitting in a highly liquid cash account is now probably not even reaching inflation in terms of the interest that you're getting on that. And that's what actually works against having these sort of things. Like, I still think it's crucial, and the missed the missed return on that is probably just the small price you pay for the emotional stability that you get, that you're not worrying about paycheck to paycheck, and you might be dipping into it occasionally and then topping it back up. But it's one of those things that if you are dipping into it to cover something, it's what it's there for. So it's doing its job, but you'd be making it priority number one to try and get that back up again before, blatting off some money on online shopping or something like that. So look, yeah, there's a number of different factors, but that's a terrific one. And then the other one, of course, is really, the key thing for a lot of people is saving up for a home.
Before we move on to that, can I just ask quickly? I thought I heard that there are some emergencies in which you can withdraw some superannuation. Is that right? And what are they, or how high is the barrier to access that?
Yeah, sure. So look, it's outside of the COVID, special rules, which was, in a way, an extraordinary, event where you could pull out the amounts that you could. There are a number of hardship conditions that you essentially you can apply to get the money out of superannuation. Where you've got to be a little bit careful with the hardship ones is that they are actually quite difficult to meet the criteria. So you can't just think, oh yeah, at some point I can get the money out. I think from memory, the rules still stand. You need to be on Centrelink benefits for 6 months, and this is the financial hardship provisions. And then the money you can get out is actually, so the block of money that comes out is then taxes actually applied to that, because you're withdrawing the money prior to your preservation age when withdrawals become tax-free. So you actually get less again. So you're taking a block out, you're losing the compounding ability, and then it's actually getting taxed on the way out. So one thing you've got to be a bit careful of there is, it's not something that you should ever be relying upon. It's something that really is there to help people that have just really, financially fallen apart. And whenever you're doing it, like in a way, you sort of, I guess I feel that, it needs to be there, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you've got no money and there's some sitting in super, but it's the damage you're then doing to your future you, that is quite something, it's a last minute lever for me that you'd really be reserving till the end. Hope that answers the question.
It does. Thank you.
Tim, just quickly, if I could jump in with a question, and I think you had hinted at it there, but in this really low interest rate environment we've got, when we've got a cash just sitting in an account or maybe in a term deposit, at the moment we're lucky to even be getting 1%, if that. So I suppose one of my questions was, where can we look with other options for investment that are either on the safer side or the higher risk end that we might be able to look at, rather than just having a block of money sitting in cash at the moment, where, as you said, it's inflation is higher than it, so it's actually going backwards in real terms.
Well, that's right. Yeah. So I've got a chart on the first Some Charts page there, Jayden, if you want. Just sort of setting the scene of what's happened in the safe space of the cash world, I guess, essentially. And as you can see, there's a couple of lines. There's a lovely, and the RBA and it was always got a lovely colour palette, but there's a mustard term deposit rate there, bonus savers and online savers. So basically you can see the trend from about 2012, which is essentially when, one of the periods when there was a lot of Reserve Bank interest rate was just getting lower and lower. They were easy. As you can see there, the online saver is pretty much at zero. You can see a trend there, can't you? And either way, if that trend decides to start to level out, it's going to level out at probably sub 2%, probably even around 1%, right? So straight away, that tells you that cash it's not really an investment class anymore. It's a holding tool for the liquidity that it provides. Okay. So what I mean by liquidity is your ability to access or convert an asset into cash. And obviously cash is cash, so it's right there. It's generally available, at call on the day. These days, unfortunately, you're paying for that liquidity through poor performance, through poor interest on those various little options that you've got. And so you need to start looking at what else you can do with the money. And this will be a prevailing problem going forward, I think, for probably the next, few people have tipped 2 years. I'd suggest 5, and some people have mentioned that it could be forever. I don't think it'll be that long, but let's see how it goes. So if we jump back to the second top tips slide, I've got a couple of different things here. So probably the first one is the chart there, the long-term asset class returns. So as you can see, this is over a very long period, and we like to look in long periods. The first decision you've got to make.
Why is that?
Why? Because because it smooths volatility is probably the main one. So the longer you're in particularly higher volatile asset classes, if you look very short term, it's a really rough ride. And if you look at a longer term, you want to see
last March in Australian equities.
Well, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So, periods of great volatility there. That was probably the most ferocious volatility I've ever seen. And, it's getting close to 100-year volatility. But the point there is that you need to start looking at your cash reserves with timeframes attached. Because if you can then look at the amount of time that you need to be, holding this for, and this is going back to that liquidity piece. If you've got money that you need to pay bills with at the end of the month, cash is probably your own option, the only option available to you. If you're saving for a, depending on your timeframes, I guess, but a short to medium term project or, goal, such as purchasing a house, then you've got to say, okay, well, if I hold it in cash and I add to it over, let's call it, 12 to 24 months or something like that. Most people take about 4 years to save a house deposit, depending if they're a couple or single. But anyway, you've got to go, okay, well, in the end of the 4 years' time, if I have a growth rate of 1 to 2% or 1.5% on my cash, and I'm adding to it regularly, what's that result going to be, and what sort of house deposit am I going to have, or what sort of house am I going to have? And then start moving around and having a look at what some of the expected returns are for other asset classes. Now, shares is obviously the other end in terms of like 100% shares and having the full volatility. That's not recommended with a 2-year time frame, but there is the ability to look at blended portfolios that carry some cash, bonds, or fixed interest, and then obviously access to shares, both large, what they call large market capitalization shares, which we deal in, or smaller ones as well, which can be a lot more volatile, but also provide a lot more growth. And it's that time frame that's crucial. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to jump in and get you to a plug for Nucleus Wealth, because it looks like we've actually had quite a few people investing their money with us for in anticipation of home deposits down the line.
Oh, look, absolutely. And for exactly the reason I think that Jayden's brought up, when you're getting a less than desirable, less than appropriate, there's a lot of different less thans I think you could apply to the current cash rates. Then you've got to look elsewhere, and obviously with different asset classes becomes risk, and also the need to have experience in sort of how you are actually going to enter those markets. Now, for some people, they want to do the work themselves and sort of become their own quasi fund manager, and I think that's okay if you've got the time and you've got the fortitude, perhaps emotional fortitude, to deal with those decisions. And for other people, they use a service, much the same way as you get a mechanic to service an expensive car. And so, that's where obviously, managed options such as ourselves, and there's plenty of them out there, can be of assistance and, and help in the dive into what is, sometimes, as you say, in March last year, a very volatile place. And so you need to be mindful of the fact that that's what can happen through advice, obviously. And we've spoken a little bit about this, but this is one of the core things in the investment space that an advisor can help with, because they're actually applying your requirements and your goals over the various asset classes and making recommendations on what they feel is appropriate. We do the same. We do it online. It's free. And the idea being as well, though, that you can have some understanding as well, that you don't want a black box sort of situation, because at the end of the day, what cash is. It's always there. It's reliable. And now, if you're stepping into the unknown, having more information about what's going on in there is much more preferable to obviously not having any at all. And so that's where getting help can be a really good start.
So I guess the question I wanted to ask was, if you do decide to go down the route of investing your home deposit that you're trying to build up outside of cash, then how do you think about that point where you might be approaching buying the house, and your time frame becomes a lot shorter, and you need to kind of manage, well, actually, so if I started on a 4-year trajectory, at 3.5 years, I didn't really matter if the market went down 30%, if it was then going to go up 40 or 50%. But if I have 3 months, like if in January last year you had been going, I've bought and I'm about to settle or something like that, you're going to need the funds. Like, how do you think about approaching that point and managing that you now have? You don't want to really be exposed to those large fluctuations.
Yeah, look, great question. Look, there's a number of ways to address it. It's almost certainly going to always result in de-risking the portfolio. And so what I mean by that is you may say, okay, I've got 4 years to invest and I'm happy with 70% equity in the portfolio, over that, to start that investment off rather. Now that may, you may come at that figure yourself, or, that may be recommended to you. But the crucial part of that then, of course, is that there's a time frame that's getting smaller. And so at the 1 year to go mark, for example, a 70% equity portfolio is probably not going to be, particularly if it's all your money, is probably not going to be a good outcome for you, or an appropriate investment. And so you've got to get in and change it. And that's where periodic reviews of your overarching strategy that you've got for your money are crucial, particularly when you're taking on risk that carries with it, the time frame. And really, yeah, as you said there, Shelley, the reason why the time frame is so important is because, and particularly, I guess, from an advisor's point of view, is because we know what markets can do on the downside. People know that shares go up and you can make money doing it, and that's wonderful. But the flip side is that markets do and can at times be very volatile and blow off. And so the ability to map that out and actually protect against it is obviously worthwhile knowing, but also worthwhile doing something about. And only you really know that time frame and how it's tracking. It is a difficult one. Look, I think for a lot of people who invest their deposits, the big problem as well is, we've got, well, you could probably call it runaway house price inflation at present. And that constantly feels like you need more and more and more. And so the propensity perhaps, or the desire to carry more risk to try and meet a hot market is sort of something you need to have a good long think about, because what can go up quickly can also go down, particularly in the share market. And you want to make sure that you're protecting against that, and maybe needing to save more. So in the last year, you're decreasing your risk in your portfolio, so potentially getting a lower expected return, but you may be needing to then meet that shortfall if your goal is where it needs to be, to add more money to just cash or something like that, or to the existing investment. So it's a tough one. Everyone runs their own race, but yeah, look, it's now more than ever for mine, this property saving piece. It's it brings with it so many complications. It's not as easy as it seems it was many years ago.
It really is very hard.
Is there a case to sort of just waiting it out? Because I can see how there's a thought of, well, I should just wait until perhaps there's a fall in the property market. However, then of course you're also running the risk that, the market just keeps climbing and you're getting further and further behind with your deposit compared with what you need.
Yeah, look, an age-old question, and certainly there is plenty of commentary, I guess, to support both sides. Probably less now for the house price crash than there has been in the last decade.
That must mean it's coming.
But it was, you probably hit the nail on the head there. But at the same time, what we, look, when you look at, and try not to go too far out of my my zone here, but like for mine anyway, when you look at markets, it's very easy to use what's called fundamentals, and look at the moment the fundamentals on affordability and the amount, the multiples that people are paying of their own income just seem obscene, and we're leading the world in some of those stats. But the flip side is there's some external effects to markets that people overlook, and so one of them appears to be our federal government's reluctance to ever let house prices fall. Now, they're a pretty big player in the rules and regulations that control our market, and so if they feel that way, they'll probably make it that way. Now, I'm not saying this is looking broadly across the entire sort of property market, and there's this very commonly trotted out saying, and I think it's correct, which is there's no such thing as a property market. There's lots of little markets. And that's where picking, one suburb over another is where the homework is, and people who do the homework are often well rewarded. But yeah, look, it's an interesting one. You can't, there's whether or not there's ever going to be a property bust per se. I think a lot of other things will need to have busted first. But look, for mine, it's often seemed crazy, the amount of lending, and that's where obviously a lot of the price growth is coming from, the extending lending. interestingly, actually, just a personal anecdote from the weekend, a friend of mine who's quite big in property, he had an investment property at the age of 18. He's done very well. Was stopped from borrowing any more money about 2 years ago and hasn't been able to borrow any more money since. So he was, he's always got excess cash. All his properties are positively geared. He's a bit of a success story in that stuff. A bit jealous of him if you're watching, Brocky. But the point of all that is that the banks are, in fact, for mine, that's what it came out. He was actually really frustrated and angry at the banks. He goes in there with a very positive story, good income, all the rest of it. Been working in the same place for 11 years now, and they actually just stopped him. They said no more debt for you.
All of the banks.
Well, all the major ones, yeah. And look, he's tried over at the last number of years to get some form of loan at a reasonable rate, obviously, not these high percentage stuff. But I thought that was fascinating because, in a way, the bank's own internal, risk meters are saying, okay, well, we're going to let people have a pretty good run with, investment properties, but we're not going to let them, start bringing in a risk, across their entire book. So anyway, I just thought I'd drop that one in, anecdotal as it is. It'd be interesting.
I have another anecdote. I moved back to Melbourne in 2013, working in finance, and number of much more senior peers were really bearish on the market, and they sold homes in Brighton and that sort of thing, and then rented them family homes, so large properties, on the expectation that the market was about to crash. And I remember talking to them a few years later, and it was their wives were not happy. It was didn't go the way that they thought it would. So, and these were finance professionals, I don't know if that means that they have any more knack than other people, but I guess the point is that even if it's your day job, it can be very hard to call.
Oh, look, absolutely. And, it probably goes back to, if anything, just sort of buying quality in a way. For mine, if you're worried about crashes, but you need to live somewhere, then if you buy in a better quality area, it's probably not going to be as affected by, whether it's stocks or houses or whatever. But
it is really interesting, though, how COVID has kind of changed what the definition of quality is in terms of, close to the city, easy to get into the office if that's where you work.
Now space.
Well, my boyfriend's trying to rent a property in Beaufort, which is just past Ballarat at the moment. And the real estate agent will not stop pushing him to try and sell it because there's so much demand for country properties at the moment.
Yeah, right. Wow. Well, there you go. Yeah, no, look, it's people that get into property, I guess they've got their own reasons and their own research, and I think the ability to have a win there is, and look, the other key thing that blows property, as an investment class, to the top of most people's list is the fact that you can use leverage, and you can get really high levels of leverage in property that you
and
just
therefore
can't get in
return,
any other
right?
Sorry.
And therefore return. So if you outlay $100,000, I mean, that's probably a bit small given Melbourne property price at the moment. But if it's $100,000, a $500,000 house, and you hold on to it for 3 years and it goes up $200,000, I mean, that's 200%, isn't it, on what your outlay is?
Absolutely. Obviously, there's some costs involved there, but
correct.
At the same time, you're right. And if you could get similar amounts of leverage so easily and at such big multiples in other markets, then they'd probably do rather well as well. But
Commonwealth Bank's not going to let you margin loan 80% of your portfolio.
They might into CBA shares, but that'd be it.
Okay.
They might build their own book that way. But the key there is that there's a bit of resilience, I guess, in property, as we've seen. We've seen the bearish sort of undertones, and look, there's always a risk. You can't say everything goes up forever, but property is just one of those things, and
it's hard to call. That would be my key takeaway. I think our anecdotes have been a bit on the bullish side, Tim, and I'm thinking I don't really want that to be the takeaway here for you guys. Look, that it's hard to call.
The one thing I'd probably leave people with, and we'll get off property, is if you are looking at getting into property, you just make sure it's affordable in the short to medium term for you. And affordability can take a couple of things. You obviously want to get something that you like, or and a lot of people are doing rent vesting, but you also, for mine anyway, and this was an easier conversation to happen with people when interest rates were 7%, like whatever it was, 10 more years ago, where it was a big hit to cash flow of your and livability. These days, with the interest rates so low, it obviously gives you the ability to borrow a lot more, and that's where you've got to be careful. And so, look, if there's the one takeaway, you want to make sure that whilst, obviously getting a house and, it's a great milestone in a person's life, you've got the ability to still live and enjoy yourself outside of it and not be chained to it. And look, I think for most people, that's not a difficult task, as long as you don't.
Be careful of the possibility of rate rises and how that can affect you, I think.
Yes. Oh, look, and
I know it's unlikely, but I'm just naturally.
I think it is. I think it's highly likely we'll see rate rises. We're just not going to see them in the quantum that we've seen them in the past. It's going
to, if you have a larger loan, it doesn't have to be the same quantum to have the same impact.
Yeah. So if interest rates go up 2%, which is not much in the grand scheme of things, that's 100% more interest you're probably paying than you are at the moment. And so that's just sort of something to think about. But anyway,
also, sorry to interrupt, Tim, but on a long enough time frame, like you might be paying this mortgage off for 20 years. In 20 years' time, you might see interest rates that are more comparable to that 7% that we saw in the past. Is that correct?
Look, anything's possible, Jayden. Anything's possible, but I'd say that, and certainly the data suggests that people are getting more and more in debt, not less and less, as time goes on. And so what that's doing is it's making everybody a lot more sensitive to very small adjustments in the interest rate changes as opposed to larger ones. I used to hang my hat on that we'll never see 6% interest rates again. I'm a little bit reluctant to do that now, but look, even 10 years ago I was saying that, and it sort of feels like it's half come true. But look at. You're just interested. It'd be very interesting to see how they could, how it could rise much further. But remembering the whole point of an interest rate rise is to slow down a heated economy and to start controlling inflation and effectively start, usurping some of that excess cash which is just being poured into assets and spending. And so if you can do that, in a moderated way with smaller rate rises, then that just makes a lot of sense that they'll just do that and they won't hopefully run it too far and grind the whole economy to a halt.
But also, sorry, Tim, I'm going to jump in here. I think the other side of the answer to that is that, especially if you're in your 20s, you are hoping to see career progression that will change that equation in a sense.
Yeah,
Jayden.
Absolutely. Yep. And look, if for most people, look, one of the beauties of property ownership, or indeed anything where you like, as in an increasing value asset, appreciating asset, is that you're in a way you're somewhat locked into a bit of a forced savings regime. So you sort of think of your mortgage repayment almost first, and then bills and food, and then whatever's left over is your spending money. So and that's probably one of the benefits that I've seen across the journey of people that have bought property when they're younger, because they've had to change their lifestyle, and they're sometimes perhaps a little bit too much, and that's where I was sort of alluding to. You want to maintain some level of lifestyle, but in the longer term though, they've been able to pay down or pay off an asset a lot sooner. So and use the the leverage and the growing property market that we've got. So not being too bullish, but there's obviously some things to think about there.
Well, that has been a really deep conversation. I don't know if that's the best word for it. Definitely insightful for me, and I'm not even in my 20s anymore. So I'd like to say thanks to Tim and Jayden and Aileen for coming on the show and helping me talk about this issue and sharing it with you. I hope you found something interesting in it, or potentially something that you might think a friend or a loved one could benefit from. So share it with them.
Thanks, Shelley. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. Thanks,
guys. So before I say goodbye, if you have any feedback for me about this episode or any ideas for future podcast topics, please let me know in the YouTube comments section, or send me an email at contact@nucleuswealth.com. And if you'd like to hear more from Nucleus Wealth, check out our other podcast, Nucleus Investment Insights, which Tim is the host of. You can head over also to nucleuswealth.com/content for all our content. If you like to stay up to date with news from Nucleus Wealth, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletters from our homepage. And I want to thank Jayden again today because not only has he participated, but he's also produced the show. So thank you, Jayden.
Thanks, Shelley.
And finally, if you know anyone who gets something out of today's show, as I said before, please let them know about it, share it with friends or colleagues to help our show grow. Thanks from myself and the team for tuning in today, and I look forward to catching you on the next one. Cheers.